Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton, and I'm joined with the Ashleigh, with the Ashleigh,
The Ashleigh.
the Ashleigh. Let's try that again with Dr. Ashleigh Moreland, also known on this podcast as the Ashleigh. So, welcome, the Ashleigh. How are you feeling today?
Let's start again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Remind Podcast. My name's David Masterton, and I'm joined with Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. If you'd heard my first intro just before this, which we've cut out, I also referred to her as the Ashleigh, which I won't do again. Oops, sorry, there I go again, Ash. How you feeling?
Yeah, good. Glad to be here. Always good to start the session with a bit of a laugh.
Yes, I don't know where I was going with the Ashleigh. I was going to say maybe it was like the wonderful, and instead I just probably put the Ashleigh in there.
Yeah.
Bit of an interesting show today. The title's going to have a number in it, 10. And we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about the 10 signs of a wounded inner child.
Yes. Yes. I think the best place to start is probably thinking about what is a wounded inner child. Some people who have followed along our podcast for a long time might be familiar with it. Other people might have heard the phrase elsewhere. I know the holistic psychologist does talk a lot about the inner child, and it's something that's been referred to pretty widely, and it's a concept that comes from various psychological or therapeutic frameworks. And what it's really talking about is that our early life experiences, particularly those in childhood, and I would even go as far as to say from a brain development perspective, the first 0 to 7 years,
Mm,
those early life experiences can have a lasting impact on our emotional well-being, on our behavior, on our relational function or dysfunction. And the inner child really represents the childlike aspect of our psyche. And so, from a mental perspective, mental meaning relating to the mind, it's the part of the mind that retains the memories, but more important than the memories is the emotions that
mm,
are attached to the experiences from those early years. So, when we think about trauma, a lot of people think just the really obvious traumas like abuse or neglect, or really significant traumas. We call them big T traumas. But the
right.
inner child stuff is really more related to the little T traumas, which are the moments in time where maybe as a young child you felt scared, or you felt confused,
Mm,
or you felt nervous or worried or sad. And in those moments, you needed something. You needed someone to come and pick you up and hug you. Maybe you needed someone to come and defend you. Maybe you needed someone to tell you that you were going to be okay, or even just explain the situation to you. And that need wasn't met for whatever reason.
mm,
That's really what we're talking about here, because those early life experiences absolutely influence the development of our brain and our mind that then we retain and hold on to in our adult lives. So when we see these
yeah.
patterns start to play out in adulthood, it can be really helpful to go and start to query and question, well, what inner child representation is playing out right now? Because if we can meet the inner child's wound and reintegrate that child into the adult version of us, then we start to see a lot more healthy function playing out in our lives.
Mm. Well, you raise a lot of good points there because when we sort of start off, there's actually a couple of things I want to dive into actually. The first thing is when we start experiencing or learning something, the first responses that we get, or the first interactions that we get, or the first feedback that we get is pretty profound.
Mm,
So if you're learning how to ride a skateboard, the first thing is not to fall over. And if you fall over, then what you're trying to do is to figure out ways not to do that. But like so when we're doing all of this learning as we're a child, we're reacting to those learnings not on a overall basis of the different feedback or the different things. We're usually taking like the first interaction and we're adjusting from that first interaction onwards.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think, a really big thing at the start. So when people sort of say healing the inner child, it's because when you have that, it's generally the first interaction
Yeah, and we
in
call
a
that
certain thing.
therapeutically, we call that the initial sensitizing event. So the initial sensitizing event is kind of the first time where you learned that
Mm,
you couldn't trust someone if you were crying, or the first time something happens. I mean, the first sign of a wounded inner child we were going to speak about today is a fear of abandonment. If we have a persistent fear of being abandoned or being rejected, whether that's in relationships or in a workplace setting or whatever the context is, quite often we can pinpoint that back to some early life experiences where we had a need, an emotional need or a nurturing need that wasn't met. And so if we were rejected, if we were abandoned, our mind starts to predict in those
mm.
moments where we have a need that we are going to be abandoned. And sometimes because of the familiarity of that, we can actually set that up to happen.
Oh,
So
yeah, because it's while you don't like it, it's still familiar.
yes, and we actually get a dopamine hit out of predicting correctly. So if we have a core
Ah,
abandonment wound, then we can set things up so that we get the hit of dopamine because we've accurately predicted that someone's going to abandon us.
yay, I win!
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. So the first part out of all that I'm thinking as you're talking about this is our first experiences are generally going to be like this expression goes, you can never redo a first impression.
Mm,
And that goes for who you are and what's going on. The second thing that sort of came to mind is when we have these first impressions and we adapt to these first impressions, we then go into the subconscious programming, which we're kind of doing things without knowing it. So we have this sort of reaction from these first things. And so if you didn't have a terrible childhood, like myself, you then go back and go, why would I have a fear of abandonment? I had a mum who was home full time. I was picked up and dropped off from school and I had blah, 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 blah. So now you're logically sort of fighting against yourself.
yeah,
Um,
100%.
and then when you expand that out, you've got the one thing that I know you teach in Rise and Thrive is that the nervous system does not operate in time or space. Now, this blew my mind. I probably said it
Well, the
in
nervous system does, but the mind doesn't.
okay. So wherever it's held, this program that started when you were maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, wherever it was, it doesn't grow up like your brain grows up. It doesn't mature like your brain matures.
Yeah.
And so I kind of see it in these three steps. You've got the initial reaction, which could have happened. You then plug it into your subconscious. You don't believe you have it because it's just sitting in the background. You're not actively looking for it. And then you realize, well, as I've grown up, I've matured. Maybe my ADHD slowed down a bit. Maybe become a bit more wiser. Maybe I don't get so competitive. The last one, I still am very competitive, so I haven't grown out of that yet. Um, but then you realize that these triggers don't go through that same thing or those wounds. So it's a very active process to go and heal the inner child
Yes.
because it's not sort of something that it should have just happened like naturally it should have happened the way I've grown up, matured, the chemicals in the brain slow down or whatever it is, it sort of mellows me out a bit more. Those same things do not happen to the inner child. So you actually have to go back. It's still exactly the same spot where it was at the start while the
Yeah.
rest of you is matured.
Yeah, it's almost like we segment, and there's actually entire therapeutic approaches or modalities that are specifically parts oriented. And so if you imagine um, disintegration, well, what's disintegration? It's breaking apart, yeah? And so there's therapeutic modalities that are entirely parts focused. So we can deal with the part of us. And maybe you can relate to this in your daily life. Like there's the part of you who knows that you really want to get up and go to the gym. but then there's another part of you that goes, "Oh, do I have to?"
The bed's really warm. I don't want to wait for the
Yeah,
equipment.
exactly.
I don't like the feeling of the chest really bad when you
Yeah,
do that first thing with the cardio, even though,
yeah.
you sort of break through it and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and so most of us can relate to this parts thing,
Mm,
right? And so we understand that the word disintegrate means to break apart. And in our early life, if we have early life experiences where we learn that there is a part of us that is a threat to our connection to our caregivers, or that is considered bad or naughty or wrong, then we can disconnect or disintegrate that part. And so we kind of almost like shut it off completely. We will shut down that part of us. But that part of us doesn't stop existing.
mm,
It's still there. But the thing that I find amazing about this is in our adulthood, when we start initiating this healing journey, it's actually about turning towards those parts that have been disintegrated and nurturing them back into reintegration. And so, this journey of wholeness is that the fact is, we've been whole the whole time. It's just that there's these parts of us that were disintegrated in those early life experiences that we felt like we had to chop off to be more acceptable. We had to chop off to fit the mold that we needed to fit, or
mm,
to survive in a family dynamic, or survive in a school system, or survive in a social dynamic. And we might have learned that, I mean, for me personally, I was nicknamed the foghorn. And anyone who's experienced the flatlining of my mic in any of this can
yeah.
probably go, "Oh, yeah, Ash, wow."
It's clipped a couple of times over these last 37 episodes, yeah.
But this is an ongoing journey for me too, and so it's that reintegration. It's unbecoming everything that you had to become to survive your past experiences and your environment.
Mm,
And as you unbecome all of that and reintegrate those parts of you, you then experience the fullness of who you are, and you can show up authentically, you can show up vulnerably, you can
mm,
have the space and the capacity to have close, nurturing, intimate relationships. And by intimacy, I'm not just talking about sex, I'm talking about emotional intimacy and closeness
yeah.
and trust. So the relevant thing about that is our number 2 sign of a wounded inner child is difficulty trusting others.
Mm,
So if there's a difficulty trusting others, that might be due to betrayal, broken promises during childhood, any time where your trust may have been broken and you learned at a young age that you couldn't trust others.
yeah, and I think, that's probably something that I fall into that bucket or have done in the past, and that's actually also shown up in hyper independency as well.
Yes.
So it's that sort of thing of I'll set my expectations really high, but I also know if I don't ask, I can't be rejected, or
And can't be let down.
I can't be let down, or
Yeah.
if I do it myself, then I don't have to worry about having to have a difficult conversation with someone, or if I don't ask for help, then they can't sort of say no because of whatever it is. So being hyper independent and difficulty in receiving,
Mm.
like that feeling of awkwardness when you actually do receive, because sort of like hang on, if I start to receive anything, then maybe I'm being forced to let my guard down just a little bit.
Yeah, and
And as
also,
soon as,
again, that lack of trust, like, what have you done wrong? Like,
yes,
or what are you
mm,
trying to do here? What's going on, you know?
yeah. Or if I let my guard down, is the other shoe going to drop? Or if I do let my guard down, when it's just a matter of time before you disappoint me.
Yeah.
So, and again, you talk about that under the first one, which I think you're saying fear of abandonment. When you can correctly predict, and you're saying
Mm.
correctly predict that with that lovely dopamine hit, which we all love, then, well, if I can predict that I can't trust you, and eventually I don't trust you, and you do something that doesn't deserve my trust, like someone says, I'll always be here for you. I'll always be here for you. I'll always be here for you. And then you go, even when I do this, yep. Even when I do this, yep.
Yeah.
Even when I do this, yep. Even when I do this. And then you go, no, that's the line. Ha, I
Yeah.
told you.
Yes. Yeah, literally set people up for failure,
Yeah.
100%. But that's completely unconscious. We don't
Yes.
sit there and write our list of ever increasing pushing of the boundaries. They just kind of naturally happen.
Mm,
But I mean, as a product of number one, fear of abandonment, and number two, difficulty trusting others, number three is having a low self esteem. So that is a
yeah.
really negative self
Mm,
image. It might be feeling unworthy. It might be really taking criticism or almost expecting criticism and a lack of validation. And so this again, that low self-esteem can come about. Now, I should have said this from the outset, but I really, really want to make it clear that this is never about intergenerational bashing. It's not about
oh, no.
shaming
Yeah.
our parents. It's not about having any kind of negative connotation to those that came before us,
Mm,
because every generation existed in the time and space of that generation. And realistically, kind of did the best they could with the resources they had available. Like I was thinking just recently, I was buttering toast for my child, thinking about this, going, my parents didn't have access to podcasts. They
mm-mm.
didn't have access to books. They didn't have access to Netflix. They didn't have access to anything. Like, where, and I genuinely was asking, if my parents were to learn anything about conscious parenting, where and how could they have accessed that? And I actually couldn't come up with an answer.
Maybe in a few books, but that would have been well ahead of their time,
Yeah, and we li we
and
we grew
it
up in a
wouldn't.
small farming district. I mean, resources
Mm,
were not easily accessible. So it was really interesting to look at that and go, where I mean, we put out this podcast and this can help so many people. There's so many other podcasts, there's YouTube channels, there's books, there's TikTok,
oh,
Instagram.
there's. I think we've said in the past on this podcast, it's not as though that people were not doing these things intentionally or for their own benefit.
Mm,
It's almost like the light has been turned on
yeah.
right at this point moment in time, and everyone in the past and everyone now and everyone in the future will be looking at this point in time going, wow. So like your parents, my parents, they grew up in a model that was modeled by their parents,
Mhm.
in a generation and a society that had very different expectations,
Yeah.
very different sort of, I suppose, standards of acceptance.
And also
And
understanding, like, I
yes.
mean, there was a period of time when it was understood that if you cuddled or nurtured your children too much, you were damaging them. And so parents,
Mm,
because they didn't wanna damage their children, they wanted to set their children up for success. It's
yep.
that idea of success and how to support your kids to achieve it was very, very different. And so
Also, it came from the same people that said smoking will help your asthma, and
mm,
it was prescribed by doctors. Not that these people were being bad about it. Like if a doctor was to do it now with all
wasn't
this,
malicious.
yeah, with all this information, if they would do it now, then it's incredibly inappropriate and not good. But back then, it was like, well, okay, and like you look back at it, asbestos, right? It was just an absolute miracle product,
Yeah.
apart from the health effects of people that
Same as
use it.
Roundup and glyphosate. Now look at
Yeah.
how toxic that's become for our health.
So there's a whole lot of different understanding around it. So you don't take any of this as parent bashing or any of that, but it's a recognition of where you've got those first instances, where that
Yeah.
first reaction, the first
Yes.
interaction that you've got, because you got to go back to that point in your body to be able to release it.
Yeah.
You can't just release it by going, again, I love my computer analogies. I'm just going to go into the folder of traumas and just go delete, put in the trash if you're a Mac user. And so you can't do that. You actually have to go find it and process it out, and that's a very important way, not to apply blame.
Well, I would say yes and no. There is absolutely, so I've got some processes that I can do with people where I don't need to know. We don't need to regress them. We don't need to do absolutely anything at all. But I think what we're speaking about specifically here is really specifically that wounded inner child, which
Yes.
if we're going to take that approach and we're
Mhm.
going to be really thinking about our childhood experiences and re integrating and reestablishing that close, nurturing relationship with that part of ourselves, then absolutely
Well,
we
you have to just
we need
recognize
to
that
acknowledge it.
it happened
Yeah.
as a child, not as a 23-year-old or
Yeah.
a 40-year-old or something like that.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
could be earlier. Okay. So, yes.
100%. And so
Um
on the low self-esteem thing, the experiences of criticism or lack of validation,
mm,
sometimes that could just be as simple as, "Mummy, mummy, look at my painting," and mummy's doing the dishes, and she's got dinner on the stove, and she's got 27,000 things on her mind, and she's got other kids
absolutely.
to look after, and she doesn't turn and look, and you feel like your painting isn't important, and you haven't done a
Mm,
good job, and you're bad, or those things. Honestly, that's what we're talking about, little t trauma. That's where low self-esteem can really start to come in, because there's been that lack of validation, there's been the lack of turning towards and that presence.
mm,
One that in my home I became really conscious of was my in a season of my life, I had young kids, my sleep was really disrupted, and almost every single morning when my son, who was the early riser, would
mm,
wake up first and he would come in and I would look at the clock and my heart would sink and I would just go, "Oh, I'm not ready to be awake." And one day I just thought, wow, what am I teaching him that the simple presence of him in the mornings makes me respond with, "Oh."
mm,
And I thought, I am in that moment every single day, I am influencing what he believes about himself. And so I made a commitment to myself that every single morning, whether I'd had 2 hours sleep or 10 hours sleep, whether I felt tired, whether I felt ready, whether it was an appropriate time or not, I would be very conscious of my physiology and my tone of voice. And I would say, "Good morning, baby. Mummy is so happy to see you."
mhm.
Even if on the inside I was dying going, "I'm so tired right now. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
wanna go back to sleep."
and I think it's also fair to say that followed by that, you could go, "It's so great to see you. Did you have a good sleep? Is everything okay?
Yeah,
Alright. Can mummy go back to sleep?"
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so we still do that. I just did that on the weekend. I was like, my husband was home, he's been working away, and we were just like, "Okay, good morning, darling. Come have kisses and cuddles. Just letting you know that this is a silent zone. We're gonna be going back to sleep. If you would like to
Mm.
stay here, you're welcome to stay and snuggle, but it's not time for chats."
We are going to be yeah.
Yeah, and then in the end, I was like, "Okay, you out. You go and read, you go and
Yeah.
play, you go and draw something, we'll be up soon." And that's not a bad thing, but it's how are you acknowledging or validating even the mere existence of someone? Are people happy to see you? This is another big one when I say to people, "How do you greet someone when they come home in your home?" Do you just
Mm.
continue on with what you're doing without even acknowledging their presence? Or do you stop what you're
Mm.
doing and turn towards them and validate them and welcome them?
Mm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you know people are coming over as well, do you clean the house? Do you make sure that as a host that you are not looking in shambles or
Well, this is a really good point, David, because
whatever
number
it is?
4 is perfectionism. So number
Ah.
4 point of a wounded inner child is perfectionism. So that's where we have a really almost compulsive drive to be perfect or to be well presented. And if we couldn't do that, we would actually feel a stress response in our body. So if you were coming to visit me and I couldn't clean my house in time,
Mhm.
well, am I able to sit in the presence of that, or do I have that compulsion and stress response in that state of perfectionism? So it's about avoiding criticism,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's avoiding judgment, it's gaining approval of people, um, and that is really common, particularly if your worth was tied to achievement in your early life. If in
Mm,
order for you to be praised, you had to have achieved, then that's a really common wounding of a childhood experience that we carry through to adulthood.
mm. Yeah, going back to my earlier example, as Christmas has come and gone, that's what sort of poked into my head. That sort of, imagine if you invite people over for Christmas and you put no effort into it. That's sort of like you don't really want them there. But if it's just like a general person dropping over or you're seeing them, it's sort of like, yeah, it's sort of like I see this magnet on fridges sometimes. Yes, my floors might be dirty or the rooms might be messy, but I have happy kids.
Yeah.
So, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%. And even on that, it comes down to also how we look. And this isn't we recently spoke about this in Rise and Thrive, where it's not about the outcome, but it's about how you feel in the outcome. So, for example, wearing makeup is not good or bad.
Mm,
But if wearing makeup is a way for you to express your creativity and express your
mhm,
uniqueness, and it feels empowering for you, then that can be a really, really positive way to meet your needs. But if you wear makeup every day because without it, you feel unworthy, without it, you feel like those negative, low self esteem starts to come in, the perfectionism, controlling people's judgments and opinion of you,
mm,
those kinds of things, well, then the makeup is no longer a healthy expression to meet a need. It's an unhealthy expression to avoid harm or avoid a threat.
mm.
And on the avoidance, number 5 is avoidance of intimacy. So this is really related to what I was just saying about if we have a difficulty forming or maintaining really deep emotionally intimate relationships where we are not masking. We can show up, warts and all, where we don't have
Mhm,
to hide physically behind makeup or
mm.
emotionally. Can we have those deeply intimate, vulnerable, raw relationships?
I'm gonna say depends, and I'm gonna throw a little spanner in the works, right? If we're talking about like a relationship of husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, the answer for me, quite simply, is no, you can't, because that's intrinsically linked. Now, if you're going to be talking about friends, then I'm gonna say it depends on the person, but absolutely you could. Because it's like when I'm talking to my best friend or my best mate or something like that, I don't need to be intimate with them, as in when we're sort of talking about the intimacy of, lying on the couch cuddling so I can express myself. I mean, that'd be pretty weird, Bruno, but, not that that's a problem,
So
but,
this is where
I'd
you've assigned meaning to the word intimacy. I'm not talking about
right.
physical intimacy. I'm talking about intimacy in relationship is about having really deep, raw, vulnerable, unmasked, pure expression of self.
So would you just sort of say that just, your version in this case of intimacy is just pure vulnerability?
Vulnerability, authenticity, showing up in the fullness of who you are without having to mask, without having
Gotcha.
to be the perfect version of yourself or the better version
Okay.
of yourself.
Well, on that basis, then yes, you have to have that to be able to really connect, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're just managing. You're
And
you're, you're
and
managing the
you're
day to day.
surface level connecting.
Yeah,
You're transacting instead of truly connecting. And I think
yeah. You can
so
be you can be a team player and not have to have that intimacy.
yeah, and this generally comes around in response to early life experiences where there's been emotional or physical harm, where we shut off. I really trusted you. And you can see how these are all intrinsically linked anyway.
Mm,
I really trusted you and you let me down. And so now I'm not going to allow myself to get that close or that deeply related to you again. Or another big one with emotional intimacy is when we have really emotionally opened up to someone and they've dropped us.
mm.
It
Or
happens in a safe
or even
space.
worse, you've got people you've dealt with which either directly or inadvertently on purpose or, subconsciously have weaponized it,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is if you really want to hurt someone at their core and in their fabric, that's what you do. You get them in, and you look at all the biggest manipulative thrillers, right? You bring them in really close, you hold them close, you get them to let everything down, and then you just go.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's something that is universal. And so, if that's happened again, intentionally or unintentionally, it can still happen.
Yes.
And it's a way of
100%.
payback or controlling, even. Like if someone
Yeah.
really wanted to control how you felt, they'll just sort of keep you on that arm's length. Don't go too
Yes.
far, don't come too close, and you're in that
Yes.
constant state of flux.
Yeah. And so
Yep.
then what would we learn from that? It brings us to the very next one, which is difficulty expressing emotion. If we learn that through
Mm,
expression, it's not safe. Either someone has physically harmed us, like I grew up with stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. So it wasn't physically safe for me to express
mm,
emotions. And I know that's a pretty common experience of that era. You know,
100%.
children should be seen and not heard,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. And so if we have expressed emotion and either and this is linking back to the concept of intimacy. If we have been extremely real and raw without masking, without breaking off the parts of us that are unacceptable or inappropriate or not good enough, um, and we haven't been met with safety and nurturing, then we learn really early that it's not safe for me to express emotions. So that means
Mm,
I'm going to numb out. I'm going to distract myself from even being able to identify emotions, is a really common one, especially for males. And so I'm going to pick up a really early life habit of suppressing feelings, numbing out emotions, and not again relating or trusting or getting close to people or allowing people to have that. The interesting thing about this can be a really learned pattern of behavior as well. So if we observe our parents
mhm,
doing that, then we can learn that not even from our early life experiences of our own, but this is where the intergenerational link can come in, because if our parents have difficulty expressing emotion and we just learn that's how you do emotion, then it's not actually necessarily our own personal experience.
mm.
It's just how we've learned to do it.
But it feels like your own experience.
Yeah,
It feels like
the
it's yours,
baton's yeah, the
even
baton
though
has
you've
been
just
passed
picked
to
it
you.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
But it's a really interesting one with, I've lost my train of thought, actually. We'll come back to that. If it pops up, I'll let you know.
Awesome. So
Next one.
next one, number 7 is overreacting to criticism. And this
Mm,
can also come about with rejection sensitivity. So RSD is this common term
yes.
that's coming up a lot at the moment,
Yeah.
and criticism is feels very threatening. So that's where we'll have
Mm,
really strong emotional reactions to criticism or perceived rejection, and that can be linked to early life experiences where there's been really harsh judgment, where there's been disapproval of who we are, how we are, what we are, etc. Like just any part of us
interesting.
that has not been accepted or approved of will come out to play when there's been any perception of rejection or criticism.
So I've been seeing a little bit there, in someone else's life. I've been sort of hearing about someone dealing with this, and it's almost like maybe an extreme manifestation of this would be that if you're not validating or agreeing with what I'm saying, you're simply criticizing. So
Yeah.
it's not even to a point where they're offering bad feedback. It's like, do you agree? No.
Yes. And
And then
yeah,
you can
if you don't
get that.
validate.
Yeah. So it's almost like it's like a light switch. You're either validating me or you're absolutely against me.
Yeah.
It's not this. We can have we can look at the same thing and have differing views, but we're in a safe space. It's quite literally that sense of, if you don't validate or you don't approve of it, regardless if you're not even being critical of them, if you simply just can't fully back it, but you go, hey, it doesn't worry me, but
Yeah.
no, I don't agree with it.
Yes.
Then it's sort of like, oh, you're against me. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not against you. I'm just not. I just that doesn't feel like that's something
It doesn't
for me.
align, yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And this is something that is really, really, really fascinating because there is a really big sense of injustice and a need to be right in order to be safe. So if there is any threat to someone's perspective or viewpoint where they are perceived as being wrong, that feels really threatening to their sense of self or identity, because it's, if our sense of self is externalized and attached to things outside of us, any threat to our ideas, our perceptions, our viewpoints feels like a direct threat to us. So
Mm,
there's a real need to be sensitive and even kind of identify that in someone and kind of be able to communicate then, I understand this must be really hard for you, and I support your viewpoint. Mine is just different, and that's okay.
mm,
I'm Christian and have many friends, many clients who have different spiritual frame of reference or belief
hmm.
systems to me. And if I went through life going, unless you believe exactly what I believe, then we can't be friends, then that's actually going to be really divisive.
Well, this podcast wouldn't exist.
No. Yeah, exactly, right? So being able to exist in our differences and feel safe in our differences and
Mm,
relate still closely, respectfully, with love to and with one another, that is a really, really, really challenging thing for someone who's
mm.
navigating early life experiences where being wrong was threatening.
Yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
that's a huge one. So people pleasing is the next logical step there. Number 8, people
Yeah.
pleasing behavior. So people pleasing behavior, if Dave and I were people pleasing, then we would alter our perspectives to meet the other person's needs or opinions and abandon our own just so that we can support or facilitate our friendship or our relationship. So, people pleasing is about prioritizing other people's needs or opinions over your own.
Mm,
And that is a long held, um, I guess, behavior that originates from just desiring approval. And we can teach people pleasers. I saw a quote recently, and it was like, adults who are people pleasers started out as children who were parent pleasers.
gotcha.
That struck me. I was like,
Yeah,
yeah, so true.
100%.
If
Yeah.
you were the good kid, if you got attention, connection, validation, approval by pleasing your parents. I remember being a little child going to the beer fridge to get my dad a beer repeatedly. I could crack open a beer at a very young age because it was parent pleasing.
Mm.
If my daddy was happy with me, then I was safe and I was a good girl. I was worthy of the oxygen I was breathing.
And look, it was a valuable life skill as well that you learnt in the process.
Yeah, as an adult who does not drink beer.
Now, what was the topic just before we had people play? What was the topic before that one? What did we
Criticism?
call that?
Rejection,
Yeah,
sensitivity? Yeah.
yeah. So imagine, and I won't assign genders to it, but let's just say the people pleaser meets and gets with the person who's sensitive to rejection.
Yeah.
It is the perfect relationship, right?
The relationship, but that's a trauma bond.
Oh,
That's
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. But you think about it, the people pleaser will always go yes, 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 yes,
yeah,
yes, and the other one will be going, I feel so validated because it never said no. Now they're both
yeah,
hurting inside,
yes. playing out their
right?
own patterns of dysfunction.
Playing it out until cue an event or cue life or cue something where it's sort of like, oh, I'm starting to heal whatever's going on. And let's just say the people pleaser starts to go, actually, every time I do this, I feel like I'm giving a little bit more away and I'm resenting you even though I'm pleasing you.
Yeah.
And then they start to change and the whole relationship breaks down. It's like, but before was perfect.
Yes,
Ah, it was a
exactly. So,
perfect.
and you could not have brought that. Everyone's gonna think that we planned this and rehearsed this or something because
We don't plan anything.
number 9 is the repetition of destructive patterns. So, if we
Beautiful.
repeating the unhealthy patterns of behavior or dysfunctional relationship dynamics that mirrored our childhood relationship dynamics. So
Mm,
even when we are like cognizant to the negative impacts or aware of the negative impacts or know that we deserve more or whatever, until we have brought this to the surface and repaired and restored those inner child dynamics, well, then we're going to continue to play it out because they're coming up
mm.
to be healed. And I love that you just talked about that because
We're on the same wavelength. That's what
we
it is.
are.
I
And
mean,
so,
it's not that far between Tassie and Melbourne. I think that's probably what it is.
but you see these trauma bonded relationships, whether like you gave
Mm.
the example of the person who's sensitive to rejection and criticism and the people pleaser. Well, the people pleaser is
Oh,
just a yes man or yes woman or not gender assigned,
see,
but
I would have gone Mister People. No, I would have gone Mister Sensitive to Rejection meets Mrs. People Pleaser. If I had to assign genders,
yeah, wow.
that's what I would have done.
Okay, and it's not always that way. As someone who
No, I
works
absolutely
Yeah,
not.
as someone who
Yeah.
works with these relationships on a, daily, if not weekly basis, there is no, like, one gender that this applies
Mm.
to. But the other is an anxious attachment person will generally match an avoidant attachment person because the
Oof,
avoidant
fireworks.
attached
Oh yeah.
will start will mimic and mirror the relational dynamics that the anxious attached person experienced in their early life, and same for the avoidant. You're playing the roles for each other so that you
Mm.
can bring to the surface the dysfunction that exists so that it can be healed. And so, number 9, if you didn't pick it up, was repetition of destructive patterns. Um, when you see the same pattern playing out, Dave and I were just having this conversation before we started recording, where you go, oh my gosh, how did this happen? How is this playing out again? And when
Mhm.
you can see these destructive patterns that have just kind of been on repeat throughout your life with different characters in the roles, then you know that that is likely stuff that could be helped by navigating
Well,
this inner child
let's just put it this way, right? Let's look at the equation, right? You put in some variables, which is other people. You put in a constant, which is, and trying to sound way smarter than I am, but just follow me along, right? The variables are the people. The constant is what they're saying. There's normally one other constant in all of that, especially what you're just talking about.
ourselves.
That's you. Yeah.
Yeah, we are definitely the common denominator, aren't we? Yes.
So it's sort of like if you're seeing a lot of it, it's because there's something for you to see, for something to you to
Yes.
change.
Exactly, exactly. And so number 10 is feeling lost or empty. So, feeling lost or emptiness
Mm,
can stem from general unmet emotional needs. If we have had to cut off parts of ourselves and we are disintegrated and we're moving through our adult lives as this disintegrated version of ourselves, this quite often comes about when people reach a point of crisis in their life. And the most common conversation that I have with people around this is, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I like. I don't know what my interests
right.
are. I don't know how I ended up here. And it really is that feeling of being lost,
How
having
did I
a,
get here? I mean, that's a big
yeah,
one, isn't it?
it's huge because where we are right now is the entire culmination of our lifetime of experiences, our
Mm,
lifetime of relationships, of decisions, of choices. So where we are now is our past that has
mm,
all accumulated to get us to here, but also the future hasn't happened yet. And so if we are currently feeling lost, if we are currently feeling this way, we can make choices that in 6 months, in 3 months even, in
Mm,
3 years, our whole life trajectory can change just by getting some insight into what are the choices that we need to change. Where am I? How did I get here? Where do I wanna go? And then how do I get there? Who do I have to be to get there?
mm,
And quite often, if where we wanna be is happier, healthier, mentally, physically, emotionally, that requires integration. It requires us to do the courageous work to turn towards these parts of us from our past that were hurting, that were scared, that were jealous even, um, that were whatever they were feeling, to turn towards them, let them know that they're safe, invite them to reintegrate back into our wholeness,
mm.
and then the barriers start to break away. So, where we're moving towards is happier and healthier.
Yeah, because it's a funny thing what you're sort of saying there, because when you're lost, if you're meant to be there, you're not lost. Okay, you're just where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Google Maps says I need to be here. I'm here, right?
Mhm.
But if you're lost, it means even though it feels like crap, it's actually the starting of the healing because you now realize whatever I'm experiencing like now, I'm not meant to be here. So now I'm lost because I don't. If I'm not supposed to be here, where am I supposed to be?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like where I am. Where do I need to go? And as you were saying, it's a reintegrating or going back and looking at all of these patterns that have been patterns on top of patterns that have played out over
Mm.
times. It's how you choose people you want to be around. It's how you choose to show up. It's how you choose to raise kids. All of these things inadvertently are choices that are now in the subconscious, not in the conscious.
Yeah.
And so we now just need to go actively back to look at what was it that I experienced back then. And by simply going back and looking at what did I experience back then, if you go back on experiences, they'll put a smile on your face. You go through
Absolutely.
experiences that make give you goosebumps, for
Mhm.
how excited and optimistic you were, and then you're going to come across things that just made you feel dread.
Yeah.
That sort of gut wrenching, your stomach falls out your bottom, and it's just like absolutely, And then you go, okay, can I explore this a bit more?
Mm.
Because normally those things are the ones that you decide to suppress, to push down, or
Yeah.
to disintegrate, chop them out. I don't want it because I don't want to feel this feeling. But as you go back and you go through, you look at those situations, visualize you holding your child self when you're going through that. That's the start of reintegrating. And then from there, then suddenly some of these patterns subconsciously get put down and you subconsciously start making different and albeit better
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And look, obviously, there's entire therapeutic processes that support and facilitate
Mm.
this. And so, if this is something that you do want to explore, absolutely reach out. But a
Links
starting
in the
point
description.
a starting point is really we've gone through this whole list 10 signs. We'll stick the list up as a written
Mhm.
list as well so that you can see those written. And I would encourage you to audit yourself, audit your life, and actually start. So when I'm working with clients, I reverse engineer it. I go, okay, redundant. What you experience, what you can remember, let's say that doesn't even matter because a lot of people will say, I don't remember much from my early life. Yeah, okay, most people don't actually.
Mm.
So let's reverse engineer it. Let's identify which of these signs of a wounded inner child do you actually resonate with? Which can you sit there and go, yeah, as an adult, I can say that that affects me. That's
Mm.
the best place to start because you can audit your life right now. And then once you have a bit of an idea about that, close your eyes. If you're a parent, I find this a little bit easier because you've had children who have needed you, who have had their struggles and
Mm.
have needed you to nurture
And
them.
by the way, the biggest mirrors in your life you're ever gonna experience.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. But turn towards it. Even if you imagine you have no recollection of the specific events that happened, if you just imagine in your mind that little girl or little boy version of
Mm,
you at whatever age, imagine it. Imagine how they were feeling. Imagine what they might have been thinking, what they were confused about, what questions they had, and just meet them.
mm,
Encourage them, reassure them. You can say it out loud. I really like to get a pen and paper and write the conversation between myself and that younger version of me. Um, but that process, if you can repeat that,
mm,
that will really support the safe reintegration because it means that little version of you knows that you are going to come back for them. They know
mm.
that you've got their back, that you're there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And another tip is if you have some people around you that you feel safe around, get this list out that we've just spoken about and just ask
Mm.
them, is there any of these that you think
Yes, that you see
I'm
in me. Yes,
and
so powerful.
yeah, and this is where we'll be a little bit analytical about it. Don't just take one person as the be all and end all. But let's just say you spoke to three people about it.
Mhm.
You might be able to get a bit of a picture.
Yeah.
Um, but even if it's just one person, it's a it's an absolute blessing. But again, but if you had a fear of opening up, that's good luck trying to get that
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Just be
try it. That in itself could be the first part of, especially for me. If it was me starting this right now, the hardest thing for me would be to actually take that list and put it in front of someone and go, "Do I display any of those?"
yeah.
I couldn't.
Especially a romantic partner, because they're the ones who see the realest and rawest
Mm,
version of you. They see the ugly parts. Trust me.
yeah,
I have
and
ugly parts still in me, and my husband and I have conversations about being each other's mirror,
mm,
and that is so hard. It's so, so hard, but also the greatest gift because when you can acknowledge that you are your partner and lover's mirror and learn, and this is not something that is inherently natural to anyone, but you can learn how to hold one another and have each other's backs through that.
mm,
It's a constant journey of learning, but the biggest thing is having a relational partner who is willing to journey that with you, because if your relationship has been built off the back of dysfunction or playing out those old um, trauma dynamics or family dynamics, well, then as you start to learn and grow, you're going to have to reassess that.
mm.
So I think we've done episodes where we've spoken about that.
Absolutely. Go check out it's starting to feel a bit more like a catalogue
Yeah.
of episodes we've got now. We're now up to 37, so
Yeah, yeah. Awesome.
absolutely. But this has been really quite cool. I've liked, having, like, the actual 10, and we've
Yeah,
gone
yeah.
back to it.
Having some structure, and they
Um,
link together so perfectly, so
mm,
beautifully.
so that's been awesome. It's been a great episode. I think we're pretty much done, Ash. Anything
Yeah,
else?
absolutely. Let us know in the comments where you want us to take these
Yes.
conversations, guys. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button. If you liked it, tickle the like button or just press it. I mean, it's up to you. We don't judge here at all. And we'll catch you next week.
Awesome.
Bye bye.
Bye.